In 1923, Marguerite was interviewed by a newspaper, and they asked her what she thought about vamps. "I don't want to be a vamp," is the cry of Marguerite de la Motte, the pretty screen actress who is winning new friends with every picture. "Imagine wallowing week after week in the role of a mean, treacherous, heartlessly selfish, and thoroughly unwholesome woman," said Marguerite. She adds that the old-style vamp was not so bad. She was so obvious that she was almost harmless, but the new baby vamp who scorns the scalps of her contemporaries and goes after the middle-aged man is Miss de la Motte's idea of the world's worst. On February 19, 1923, the famous Mrs. Fair would be released. Myrtle Stedman plays Mrs. Fair, and Huntley Gordon plays Geoffrey Fair. Cullen Landis plays their son, and Marguerite plays Sylvia Fair, their daughter. And although Marguerite said in the previous article she really didn't care for the new vamps, she actually vamped it up in this one. Her portrayal of Sylvia, along with her role in the movie Shadows, would earn Marguerite a spot on the Best Individual Performances of the Year that was put out by Moving Pictures magazine. The movie, originally titled Jim, would be released in February as well, under the title What a Wife Learned. It stars John Bowers as Jim Russell, a rancher, and Marguerite plays Sheila Dorn, the woman who catches his eye. They eventually fall in love and marry. She is a writer who finds her latest novel grabbing the interest of a New York theater producer played by Milton Sills, who falls in love with her. Jim, never wanting to interfere with her career, finds himself assuming that his wife returns the love of the producer and prefers New York over their ranch and their marriage. What a Wife Learned was directed by John Griffith Ray, who Marguerite had worked for in his stock company when she was a teenager. During the filming, Marguerite and John seemed to have grown a friendship and would even have lunch together. Marguerite usually made friendships on the set, so nothing was really thought about it. The movie, originally titled The Brotherhood of Hate, was released in March of 1923 under the new title Scars of Jealousy. It also stars Frank Keenan, Lloyd Hughes, and Edmund Burns. Marguerite had a prized Airedale, and his name was Freud, a furry friend she would sometimes take with her on location. In Scars of Jealousy, she had a scene which called for her to be in a swamp at night, screaming. When she started filming her scene, flailing in the water and showing distress, Freud heard her and broke free from where he was being held and plunged out of the darkness into the water to save Marguerite. It is said that no less than 6 men had to try and capture Freud and secure him, so he wouldn't ruin the scene again. The movie, Just Like a Woman, starring Marguerite, would also be released in March. Her co-stars were Ralph Graves, Julia Calhoun, George Fawcett, and J. Frank Glendon. It was produced by the Grace S. Haskins Company. Not only did Grace produce the film, but she was co-writer, and she was only 22 years old at the time. There was even a glowing article about her, but sadly, this seems to be the only film she produced that made it to the screen. On May 12th, a cast announcement went into the press for the principal players that were selected for the Associated Authors' forthcoming production of Richard the Lionhearted. Marguerite was chosen to play Lady Edith Plantagenet. Also on May 27th, Marguerite signed a long-term contract to appear in Principal Pictures. They offered her this contract while she was filming When a Man's a Man, on location in Prescott, Arizona, and the film was being directed by Edward F. Klein. She was playing the female lead opposite of John Bowers, her co-star and friend from What a Wife Learned. She did receive a salary increase under this new contract, from $750 to $1,250 per week. Thanks to inflation in today's money, that would be over $14,000 to an increase of $23,000 per week. During the filming of this movie, Marguerite had to overcome her fear of snakes as she had a scene where she had to play with one like a pet. She was scared to death, but John Bowers told her, "Now, come on, don't be scared of a little old snake." And while she filmed the scene, he was just off camera giving her words of encouragement and comfort. Marguerite and John also had a near miss while filming. They were in a car with the driver, and also with them was Mrs. Klein, wife of the director, and Mrs. Bernstein, wife of the production manager. They were rushing to Williamson Valley to film at another location, when suddenly the car hit a large herd of sheep that were on the road. The impact threw the car to the other side, settling on the steep slope, just stopping from toppling over. It is said the driver had some skills and managed to somehow stop the car from flipping and rolling over the slope. Sadly, though, 7 of the sheep were killed. Marguerite and the others suffered from minor bruising and some shock. So Klein, the director, sent them back to Prescott, and he continued to film other scenes that John and Marguerite were not scheduled to be in, so they could go get some first aid and heal a bit. But that wasn't the end of the danger on set of this film. The company drove out to the Arizona desert and pitched some tents and sets to film some scenes. The actors and crew were going to stay in the tents overnight. During the evening on the second day of filming, a strong wind arose which got stronger as the night fell. Several natives of the area warned them to return to Prescott for the night, but the director said no, as they had early morning scenes to film and he wanted to catch the light. A crew member was the first to get up early, and he saw a huge sandstorm in the distance, the size of a mountain, coming straight for them. He ran and woke up the others, including Marguerite and John. They got into their vehicles and made a quick exit. When they returned, the sets were demolished and their tents were ripped apart like paper. And yet the film was to have another mishap. When they had almost completed filming, John, who was a very good horseman, decided to do some of his own tricks and stunts, although they had a professional rider on standby. While trying to do one of the stunts, the horse bucked him off and he fell and broke his leg. So the professional rider had to step in and do those stunts after all. Despite all these obstacles, Marguerite and John's friendship seemed to have grown. Even the other cast members could see there might have been a spark that was lit and getting brighter between the two of them. Marguerite, who enjoyed the company of everyone, was spending her time between filming alone with John. And when he broke his leg, it was Marguerite that was there, giving him comfort. It seemed they might have been falling in love. As soon as the filming was completed and his leg healed, both Marguerite and John were doing double duty again, and they started filming Richard the Lionhearted. In June, yet another film would be released, A Man of Action, starring Douglas MacLean alongside Marguerite. This was filmed long before her latest contract and was produced by the Thomas H. Ince Corporation. When they were done filming, Marguerite purchased the jade jewelry she wore in the film and said, "Jade is more beautiful than diamonds, and that imitation sparklers were good enough for her as long as she could have a few real pieces of jade." Busy as she was, she would find time to do promotion in the magazines. Here she is with the Reverend Neil Dodd. On his other arm is Estelle Taylor, and behind them is Walter Long, her co-stars, who had already filmed the movie Desire. And also in the back is director Roland V. Lee, who directed Marguerite, along with her male lead in the film, John Bowers. And here we see her sitting with Harrison Ford and Tom Foreman. July 1923, Marguerite appeared in a fashion spread based on flapper fashions. Her foxtrots that she composed were still being played in the fashionable cafes and venues, so it'd be natural for her to be in the flapper scene. Also featured on the same page is a name those of you who have watched my past videos will recognize: Lucille Rickson. Lucille was born in August 1910, so in this photo she would be just shy of her 13th birthday. Sadly, she would die only 2 years later from when this picture was taken. Also in July, Wandering Daughters, a comedy drama, would be released starring Marguerite and co-starring William V. Mong, Marjorie Daw, Mabel Van Buren, Noah Berry, Alice Howell, Pat O'Malley, and Alan Forrest. It was directed by James Young and produced by the Sam E. Rourke Production Company. An article came out in August describing some of the best kisses on the screen. One involving Marguerite and John made the cut, as it were. Here is the description. John Bowers and Marguerite Delamotte are caught in a scene from What a Wife Learned, in the act of delivering one of the screen's most conventional kisses, the sort that one gives after long years or months of separation. The article then goes on to say, incidentally, rumor hath it that John and Marguerite are shortly to be married, which offsets the contention of some that no one ever gets any real enjoyment out of a screen kiss. The rumors were now hitting the publications, but was it true? Were they getting married? It seemed neither John nor Marguerite were confirming these rumors. John had been married twice before. His first wife was the actress Beulah Pointer, whom he married in 1911. It was her second marriage, his first. They formed their own theater group company and even starred together in the film The Little Girl That He Forgot. They divorced in 1918. His second wife was Rita Heller, who the papers called a non-professional. They married in 1918, almost as soon as his divorce was final from Beulah. Their marriage was rumored not to have lasted too long, but unfortunately I'm unable to find a record of their divorce to confirm when their marriage ended. Also in August, Marguerite was breaking ground for the new West Coast Theater's house in Santa Monica. On October 1st, Marguerite and John's film Desire was released. Then on October 15th, Richard the Lionhearted would make its premiere. Wallace Beery plays the lead as King Richard. Charles Gerard plays Sultan Saladin. Kathleen Clifford plays Queen Berengaria. As mentioned before, Marguerite plays Lady Edith Plantagenet. John Bowers plays Sir Kenneth, Knight of Leopard. Rounding off the cast is Clarence Geldert as Sir Conrad de Montserrat, Wilbur Higby as Sir Thomas de Vaux, and playing the hermit is Tully Marshall. The movie was based on Sir Walter Scott's novel The Talisman. Sadly, it's considered a lost film. But it seems that Marguerite had some special visitors that came to see her on the set: Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks. Mary had been quoted as complimenting her friend Marguerite as a talented rising star. It was around this time that Marguerite would start pronouncing her last name de Motte, and some articles claimed she was from France. Studio spin yet again, just in time for promotion of the film. It was also in October that Screenland would publish an article that would get them into very hot water with two of the biggest stars of the time, Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford. And in this scandalous article, Marguerite would be named alongside Evelyn Brent. Take your choice. There seems to be a difference in opinion over why Evelyn Brent took her makeup box and left the Fairbanks lot. Evelyn said that she had signed with Doug to work in pictures, and that so far she had been the world's champion wrestler. Doug said that his Thief of Baghdad picture had to be an airy, ethereal sort of picture, and that Evelyn was a bit too voluptuous to match the picture. But Dame Gossip says that Mary put her pretty little foot down and told Doug to get another leading lady. For be it known that Doug has an appreciative eye for feminine pulchritude, and Mary knows the weakness of sex. The same thing is said to have happened when Doug was casting for Robin Hood. Marguerite de la Motte had been eminently satisfactory to the public and to Doug, and Fairbanks expected to retain her for Robin Hood. But Marguerite had been announcing fondly in print that all that she was and all that she hoped to be, she owed to Douglas Fairbanks, or words to that effect. So Mary changed his mind and picked out Enid Bennett, a lady who was safely in love with her own husband. So there's 3 stories. You pay your money, and you takes your choice. Right after, Doug and Mary announced they were going to sue the paper for slander. Evelyn Brent also became a plaintiff in the planned suit against the magazine. Fairbanks told the papers Marguerite was debating whether to join their suit or to file one on her own. Anytime Marguerite was approached by a reporter, she declined to comment on the whole situation. On November 3rd, Fairbanks and Pickford obtained the services of the law firm of O'Brien, Malvinsky, and Driscoll, and ordered them to begin a suit for libel against the magazine. Evelyn was quoted as saying in the papers she only had a professional relationship, which was backed up by her husband, movie executive B.P. Feynman. Mary called the story nasty and unjust. She also stated, "My husband follows along wherever I go on location, even if he has to stop work on his own pictures." Mary also followed that up with, "I think she is a beautiful girl," meaning Evelyn, "and I love to see beautiful women in Mr. Fairbanks' pictures. They are flowers and other beautiful things. I helped select Miss Brent for the picture in which she appeared with my husband." Fairbanks, however, called the writers of the story mental perverts and said they had been talking about him for years. Although Dennis F. O'Brien was personal counsel for Fairbanks, Moses S. Malvinsky revealed the firm was already considering action against the magazine over 3 weeks prior. In the February 1924 issue of Screenland, a 2-page rebuttal titled "Screenland Fights for Freedom" was published, not just directed towards Fairbanks and Pickford, but also directed to many stars they were in hot water with. These stars included Alice Terry, Claire Windsor, and Norma Talmadge, among many others. Even the Western Association of Motion Picture Advertisers, known as WAMPAs, threatened to boycott the magazine and not allow them anywhere near the studios or the stars. I will read this portion of the rebuttal written by Myron Zobel, magazine publisher for Screenland. Myron Zobel, publisher of Screenland, a magazine devoted to motion pictures today, issued a signed statement answering the announcement that Douglas Fairbanks, Mary Pickford, and Evelyn Brent will sue the magazine for alleged libel. Mr. Zobel's statement said, "In its 3 years of publication, my magazine has been a staunch supporter of all that is best in motion picture production and in the lives of its people. It is the intention of this magazine to fight with redoubled vigor its battle for freedom of the screen. It is the belief of the supporters and editors of this magazine that the hope of a free screen lies first and foremost in a free screen press. Uplift Films. It is the intention of this magazine to mold its editorial policy towards the one sole object of the improvement of screen conditions and a higher quality of screen products. In this struggle, individual vanities and personal pride must frequently suffer. The motion picture is no longer a commercialized industry. It has become a public institution and a public trust, and as such is subject to public scrutiny and public comment. My magazine declines to become the vehicle for paid propaganda. You read further on in this lengthy article itself, it does mention Fairbanks and Pickford again. Now, Screenland never intended to hurt Mr. Fairbanks or Miss Pickford in any way. It has full appreciation of the part they have played in the screenplay's progress. It regrets the many false intimations of libel because it feels that these two stars were innocently dragged into the magazine's fight for freedom of expression. Was this Screenland's attempt at a backhanded apology? Also mentioned in this 2-page article, it states that the moment this page went to press, no official action had been taken by Mr. Fairbanks or Miss Pickford. It is speculated a retraction was made by Frederick James Smith, editor. I looked for a retraction, went through every issue with a fine-tooth comb, but could not find one. Even the papers did not mention this lawsuit again. So what happened? Was the backhanded apology accepted? Is it possible there was an out-of-court settlement which the public was not to be privy to? To this date, I cannot find evidence as to what really happened. But one thing is evident. After the initial threat of the lawsuit, Marguerite dropped the subject and never talked about it again. However, Marguerite was busy in February of 1924. Her movie, Stop at Nothing, was released. It co-stars George Larkin, Ollie Kirby, Victor Mezzetti, Otto Mezzetti, and Kenneth Green. It was produced by Charles R. Seeling. As you can see, this film does survive, so I do encourage you to go seek it online. Other than the movie being released, she was spending more time with John. John had a passion, and that was for sailing. He would take Marguerite out sailing with him around the Coronado Islands and off the lower California coast. It was possible, on one of these trips, is when he proposed to her. By the end of February, they were engaged. March 1924, When a Man's a Man finally hit the theaters, and the pair admitted it was during the filming of this movie their romance blossomed. Now engaged, John and Marguerite started building a $300,000 dream home on a Hollywood hill, which they would share as husband and wife. The cost to build that home today would be over $5 million. But then again, both John and Marguerite were at the top of their careers. They could finally afford their dream home. And Marguerite kept starring in films. On August 3rd, Behold This Woman is released, also starring Irene Rich and Charles A. Post. September would be another eventful month for Marguerite. September 13th, she signed a contract with the Vitagraph. And on September 15th, another one of her films was released, Clean Heart, also starring Percy Marmont, Otis Harlan, and Andrew Arbuckle, cousin to Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. Marguerite had to do a dangerous stunt on this film. She was required to back off a cliff, slide over the embankment, and be caught by Percy. And when both of their lives became endangered, she would let go of her hold and drop into the water beneath. Doubles were not used as the scene called for close-ups. Because of the possible dangers, this scene was one of the last ones to be filmed. She managed to do it in one take, and both of them thankfully survived. The camera stopped before she was to let go, and was replaced by a dummy dressed like her to drop down a gorge. Marguerite could now add stunts to her growing resume in the film industry. While John and Marguerite were building their dream home, many of her films and John's would be released. October 19th, Gerald Cranston's Lady premiered, and it also starred James Kirkwood, Alma Rubens, and Walter McGrail. And in November, 3 of her films would be released. The Beloved Brute premiered November 9th. It also starred William Russell, Victor McLaglen, and Stuart Holmes. Those Who Dare premiered on November 15th. Another film that she made with her now fiancé. East of Broadway had its premiere on November 23rd. It also starred Owen Moore, Mary Carr, and Eddie Gribbon. In between movie premieres, building their dream home, and doing exhausting days at the studio, rumors persisted about are they or are they not married? In December, an article may have answered this rumor. Are John Bowers and Marguerite de la Motte married? All of Hollywood believes they are, but the two most interested parties steadfastly deny it. Not yet, simply engaged. This is their answer to reporters and friends alike. But the colony is finding their denials rather hard to swallow, especially in the face of the fact that one John Elihu Bowersox, native of Indiana, age 34, and Beatrice Lamotte, native of Minnesota and age 21, took out a license and were married in San Bernardino on December 12th. Now, strange as it may seem, John Bowers' real name is John Bowersox, and Indiana is his birthplace, while Marguerite hails from Minnesota. When confronted with this damaging piece of evidence, Bowers still admits his engagement and denied his marriage. The other Bowersox is my nephew, explained the actor. He married a Miss Lamotte. I'll produce them if you don't stop pestering me. But he hasn't produced the said nephew and his blushing bride. No, not yet. Strange coincidence, don't you think? Yes, strange coincidence. In fact, I did some of my own research. John's middle name is Elihu. His full real name, John Elihu Bowersox, same as in the article. He had 2 brothers and possibly 2 sisters. Bruce, his brother, died in 1890 at the age of 16 with 2 others in a terrible train wreck near Bairdstown, Ohio. This brother didn't have a chance to get married and have children. And sadly, this accident is something that did affect John for the rest of his life. He had another brother, Charles. He did get married and lived to 73 years old, but sadly it looks like he and his wife didn't have any children. Then you have Gertrude, his sister. She was married to a Robert Walter Bonnier, and there are no nephews there. Then you have Blanche. It looks like she was married later in life and had 1 child, a son, in 1919. So that child would be about 5 at the time. A little too young to be engaged, don't you think? And while trying in desperation to find this wedding license, I stumbled upon Marguerite's middle name in California state vital records. Guess what it was? Beatrice. Although I couldn't find the license, I believe John was calling their bluff. That marriage license the reporter found was indeed his and Marguerite's. Also in December, the papers reported that Marguerite signed up for the movie Lady of the Night. The year 1924 would end with yet another film being released, In Love with Love by Fox Studios. Her co-star was Alan Forrest, who was married to Lottie Pickford at the time. And it also stars Harold Goodwin and Mary Warren. Marguerite rang in the new year by helping promote one of Wampa's baby stars, Edwin Hubble. Also in January, Marguerite and John took a tour inspecting the new Rampart Theater in Los Angeles. It was being promoted as state-of-the-art for its time and was erected at the cost of $125,000. January also saw a royal visit to the Fox Studios, Countess M. Schill of Denmark. Here you can see her standing with Marguerite. Marguerite also attended the Theater Owners Change of Commerce annual ball at the Astor Ballroom, where Tom Megan and Bebe Daniels were crowned king and queen of the ball. Here she is in February with a bunch of other stars, including her now husband, John, although they were still denying they got married. Dorothy McHale, Viola Dana, Doris Kenyon, and many others, who traveled to Philadelphia to do a radio broadcast put on by radio station WIP, where they would answer questions from fans. This event would take place at the Metropolitan Opera House. It is said staff had trouble trying to handle the 5,000 fans that tried to squeeze into the place to see their favorite stars. Many actors and actresses during the silent era also did their part by participating in fundraising. Here we see Louise Glam, John, Dorothy McHale, Pat O'Malley, and Marguerite took part in a luncheon to raise funds for the Near East relief. I was lucky to stumble upon footage of this very luncheon. The Near East Relief Fund provided aid to refugees and orphans after the Armenian, Assyrian, and Anatolian Greek genocide. In February, the film Cheaper to Marry would be released. Starring alongside Marguerite was Conrad Nagel, Louis Stone, and Paulette Duvall. Also in February, another John and Marguerite film would be released, Flattery, which also starred Alan Hale and Grace Darmond. A scene called for Marguerite's character to jump from a fourth-floor window of the City Hall at Long Beach. Although Marguerite did some of her own stunts in past films, it was decided for this one to get a professional stunt double. Good thing, too. Well, for Marguerite. Gladys Johnstone, a former artist model, now stuntwoman, dressed in Marguerite's clothing and leapt from the fourth floor into a net below, but she broke 3 of her vertebrae as she landed. In March of 1925, the couple were still denying their marriage, as seen in this article. No, we are not married. And they even still went with the "it was a relative" story, as seen at the end of this article, where the story changed from "it was his nephew" to "now it's his cousin." Yes, I did my research. No, he didn't have a cousin with the exact same name as himself who married a Motte. May would see another film released. The movie, originally titled Lady of the Night, not to be confused with the movie released the same year starring Norma Shearer, would now be released under the name Daughters Who Pay. Marguerite would star alongside a future famous count, none other than Bela Lugosi. John was also in the film, and it was produced by Banner Productions and was written by William B. Lobb. Thankfully, a copy of this movie survives at the George Eastman House. In August, 3 films were released which Marguerite appeared in. The Girl Who Wouldn't Work and Children of the Whirlwind both starred Lionel Barrymore. Off the Highway, she would appear alongside her husband, John. Did they finally admit by now they were married? The answer looks like a big no, although they were being photographed together in popular magazines of the time. Here in the paragraph below, John is denying their marriage yet again. On October 31st, 1925, Marguerite would get some devastating news. J. L. Frothingham was judging a dog show at Balboa Park in San Diego. This wasn't the first time judging. According to some articles, it was a regular pastime for him that he really enjoyed. It was Friday night, October 30th. While judging dogs at the Coronado San Diego Kennel Club show in the Country Fair building, Frothingham put his head to his head, and spectators thought he was expressing his inability to reach a conclusion on judging. But then he staggered and fell. A physician was called in, who stated that his death had been almost instantaneous. Frothingham was only 45 years old. Cause of his death is described as an episode, but by reaching for his head before he dropped, some speculated it could have been a brain aneurysm or some type of stroke. On other sites and reports, they say that he passed away on Halloween, October 31st, but state death records put the date as October 30th. He was laid to rest in what is known as Hollywood Forever Cemetery. Marguerite's last film to be released in 1925 was the drama The People vs. Nancy Preston, starring alongside John. Some critics and filmgoers said at the time it was one of her best dramatic performances, and sadly her mentor, Frothingham, would never see it. 1926 started out with John and Marguerite being called the perfect lovers, according to critics. but still trying to avoid the question, are you or are you not married? Reports are at this time, Marguerite was saying they were enjoying their long engagement. Makes me wonder if they were denying this for their own privacy, or the studios had some influence, worried it would keep some of the lovelorn fans away from the movies. 2 films starring Marguerite was released in January of 1926. Hearts and Fists, which also co-starred John and co-starred Alan Hale and Dan Mason. That was followed by Fifth Avenue, starring Alan Forrest, Louise Dresser, and the beautiful Anna May Wong. And also in the movie was a young actress in a bit role named Sally Rand. Yes, that's Sally Rand, who became a burlesque star and is remembered for her famous fan dance. In March, the movie Red Dice was released. Marguerite's co-star was Rod LaRocque, and making another appearance is Sally Rand. In May, the film The Unknown Soldier would be released, co-starring Charles Emmett Mack, Claire McDowell, and Henry B. Walthall. Sadly, in less than a year after the release on March 17, 1927, her co-star Charles Emmett Mack was killed in a car accident on his way to the studio to film final scenes for the movie The First Auto. Charles was initially being billed as that movie's star in all publicity, but due to his untimely death when the movie was initially released, they moved his name down the list of credits. Cold, if you ask me. By July, the couple were no longer denying the rumors of marriage. It was just accepted in the film community that they had been fibbing all along, and that they had indeed got married back in December of 1924. When they were not spending time on the movie set, they enjoyed sailing together and were now living in their mansion in the Hollywood Hills. They would throw parties here, where they would entertain many of the famous faces of the silent screen. August would see 2 films released featuring Marguerite. Meet the Prince, a romantic drama about a Russian prince who flees to America to escape communism and crashes into society where he falls in love and wins a young heiress's heart. That would be Marguerite. Joseph Schildkraut played the prince, and I probably butchered that name and I apologize. In a minor role was the beautiful Bessie Love. The second film would be The Last Frontier. William Boyd plays Tom Kirby. Marguerite plays Beth, his fiancée. Jack Hoxsey plays Buffalo Bill Cody, and J. Farrell McDonald plays Wild Bill Hickok. Sally Rand makes a reappearance in this movie as well. Her last movie of 1926 was Pals in Paradise, where in the initial release she had top billing over her husband, John. The film also stars May Robson and Alan Brooks. In early 1927, John decided to buy a ranch near California where he and Margaret could grow oranges, and so they could just get away from it all for a while. They still, however, owned their mansion in the Hollywood Hills, so financially things were going well for the pair. Their mansion was still used to hold their parties and social gatherings, but their ranch was their little slice of heaven away from it all. The both of them seemed very happy, and Marguerite was still head over heels in love with John. In February, the movie Final Extra was released. Marguerite starred alongside Grant Withers and John Milan. Some of this movie, as you can see, still exists, although not very good condition. April would see the movie Held by the Law released. It also stars Johnny Walker, Ralph Lewis, and Maude Wayne. The Kid's Sister was released in July, which also starred Anne Christie, Malcolm McGregor, and Brooks Benedict. September would see a movie released where both John and Marguerite would get top billing, Ragtime, which was called by critics a fine jazz film. Interestingly enough, John plays Steve Martin, a professional dancer, who meets at a nightclub Beth Barton, a daughter of a millionaire, played by Marguerite. The movie also stars Rose Dion as Goldie Martin, Robert Ellis as Slick Martin, William H. Strauss as Max Ginsburg, and Kate Bruce plays Mrs. Manson, Steve's mother. Broadway Madness would be released in October and would be the last of her films to be released in 1927. Marguerite was touted as the charming star of this film, and I found the write-up on this movie from 1927, and I would like to share it with you. Marguerite plays the role of Maida, a showgirl, gold digger, and a quick worker, who undertakes herself to represent herself in a quiet little village as a girl whose rich uncle has bequeathed her a fortune. Donald Keith has the role of David, to whom the fortune will go if efforts to locate the missing heiress proves unsuccessful. Her efforts to escape from the quiet of the village and return to her nightclub life indicate clearly that she likes the simple silence of a rustic life much better. An uncle of the boy, who proves to be dishonest, and a lawyer who aids the uncle, knows the girl is not the heiress, but uses her to help them spend the money belonging to the boy. Eventually, she falls in love with David and confesses her deception, but David forgives her and they marry. Also starring in the film is Robert Dudley, Louis Payne, Oral Humphreys, Betty Hilburn, and Margaret Cloud. According to the papers, Marguerite and John would spend December doing various charity work. Marguerite made several personal appearances for Christmas funds, and John appeared in several what they called entertainments for Christmas benefits. 1928 started out as a quiet year for Marguerite. John was filming new films to be released the next year, but Marguerite was enjoying her time off. That was until she was approached by a former colleague and friend for his new project, Douglas Fairbanks. He was making a sequel to The Musketeers and wanted Marguerite to reprise her role as Constance. She gladly accepted. In interviews, Marguerite said she found herself going back to her dance training. She said it was much help to her, as when Fairbanks would swing her over his shoulder and carry her, she would need to know how to balance. During my research, I did find one place where Marguerite and John visited, Vancouver, Canada, in 1928, as shown in this photo. I would love to know more about their visit, but sadly, I couldn't find any more information. The Iron Mask would be released February 21st in 1929. This would have a couple of firsts for fans of Douglas Fairbanks. It would be the first time a character played by Fairbanks would die on screen. It would also be the first time audiences would hear his voice in a movie.
Shadows of the past, as from a faded tapestry of time's procession, slow and vast, I step to bid you bear with me, for while your fancy I engage, to look upon another age.
He would speak briefly in 2 short sequences in the film. The rest of the movie would still be silent, but would have a song, One for All for One, sung during the film and had accompanying music. Marguerite only appears in the first 30 minutes of this film, as her character is, spoiler alert, murdered. But the scenes with her and Fairbanks are magical. Also starring is the beautiful Belle Bennett, who I covered extensively on this channel in another 3-part series. The film was a huge hit, and thankfully it survives in various versions today. While Marguerite was completing the scenes for Iron Mask, she was already filming Motte Rose that would be released in March of 1929. The movie also stars Rosemary Thebe and Harry Myers. This movie was overshadowed by The Iron Mask, who had the star pull of Douglas Fairbanks. Marguerite would go back to her quiet life during 1929, away from the studio. She would accompany John to his film premieres, but in 1929, The Iron Mask and Motte Rose would be the only 2 films she would be featured in. In a 1930 census, we get to see where Marguerite and John were living, 2936 Montcalm Avenue. If we go to Google, we can still see the front gate of this residence, but I cannot confirm if the house they built was still standing. Odds are it probably isn't, as Los Angeles doesn't have a good track record with preserving historical mansions and homes. They're usually lost due to someone wanting the land and demolishing the homes of the stars to build their own home. Or sadly, as we've seen too much lately, homes lost due to fires. Now in this same census, there's a daughter that's indicated. And this has been showing up in family trees and brief articles online due to this record. Problem: Marguerite didn't have a daughter, and John was to have no kids at this time either. Here you see John's name, followed by Marguerite, his wife. Underneath we have another name, a Josephine, and it's hard to read the last name, but some are saying it's Zabel or Zobel. I think it looks more like Zoll, a German name. And it says beside this name, daughter. Okay, let's examine this a bit more. If you scroll over to the house numbers, John and Marguerite are, as in previously stated, 2936. Josephine is in 5-something-something-51. Wow, those census takers have bad writing. Now look where it says her father was born, Germany. That rules out John. Now look where it says where her mother was born, Wisconsin. Marguerite was born in Duluth. But if this daughter was born around 1900, she is younger than Marguerite, so that rules out her as her mother. Now, interestingly enough, some records say Beulah Pointer supposedly had a daughter named Josephine, according to some records, although nowhere in public profiles, that was born in 1912. This means that Beulah was still married to John when she gave birth to this child. The last name of this daughter in these supposed records state that her last name is the same as Beulah's third husband, who she would marry long after John. But if it's John's daughter and they were married, why keep it hidden and give her another name? I don't believe this is John's daughter either. What I believe is it's a mistake made by a census taker. There could have been someone living with Marguerite and John, but not a daughter, but maybe a maid or even a relative. Or even their bookkeeper, as it shows her profession as a bookkeeper. And census takers do make mistakes. The census of my great-grandfather lists my great-grandmother as his daughter, yet she was only a year younger than him. One thing that was being kept from the public about Marguerite and John, alcohol was becoming a problem in their marriage, and one can only hide that from the public for so long. On July 18th, 1930, John's drinking would catch up to him. It was late on a Friday when police responded to a complaint by the neighbors claiming John was holding target practice. When the police arrived at their mansion, they found John sitting in the back seat of an expensive car playing with a revolver. Two young women were in the front seat, while John was trying to compliment the officers to get out of his situation. He even claimed he was 19 years old, but one of the officers recognized him and said, "Yeah, try your late 30s." He then challenged them to target practice, saying he could win shooting upside down. Who were the two young inebriated ladies in the front seat? Marguerite, and a woman who identified herself as a Miss Lesieux, who said she was cousin of Joan Crawford. A cousin. Police let both of the women go, but Miss Lesieux's true identity was never released. Most of you would know what I'm pointing at. For those of you who don't know, Joan Crawford's real name was Lucille Fay Lesieux. John, on the other hand, was taken into custody and went before a judge. He denied the charge, claiming the police refused to let him take a sobriety test. He was then released on $450 bail, which works out to over $8,000 in today's money. He was to come back to court on July 21st. When he failed to appear on schedule, his bail was forfeited and a bench warrant was issued. He finally appeared on July 23rd after learning that the police were looking for him. His excuse? He was unable to find the courtroom. Judge Edwin Miller amazingly accepted this explanation and ordered the actor to return on the 24th to face charges of being drunk in an automobile. Amazingly, yet again, the charges were dropped and John went free. Things got worse for the couple, and on December 19th, the papers would report that shortly after this incident, John moved out of their home and they separated almost instantly and then filed for divorce. Marguerite said, "We parted the best of friends. I guess it's just a matter of incompatibility. Things got to a point where it was better for both of us to try alone. John is a marvelous fellow and I wish him the best of luck." She also mentioned she was considering a number of offers from the stage and screen, while John had been engaged in the aviation business. Marguerite would only make one film in 1930, Shadow Ranch with Buck Jones. The movie was released September 28th, but audiences would hear her speak for the first time on screen.
"You don't think I'd do anything to hurt you?"
Oh, no. But it seems rather strange that most of my cattle have disappeared, my cowhands driven away, and then Ranny Williams killed.
Shadow Ranch starred Buck Jones, Kate Price, and Albert J. Smith. Her career was definitely slowing down. Once in demand in not only the movies but the magazines, her face and name were being seen less as time went on. 1931 was a quiet year for Marguerite, and she preferred to spend her time vacationing in Mexico. But when she came back, she had her own problems. In November of 1931, a bench warrant was issued for the arrest of Marguerite, charging that she had exceeded the speed limit while driving her automobile in Los Angeles. Marguerite then seemed to disappear from the spotlight altogether and went back to Mexico for a while. In 1933, Marguerite would put her focus on the theater stage, but that wouldn't last long as she got a call to return in front of the screen. Magazines began announcing that she was making a comeback. Marguerite would appear opposite of Wallace Ford in the comedy A Woman's Man, touted as a Hollywood insider story. Here is a synopsis of the movie I found from a 1934 Variety publication. A temperamental picture player falls for a prize fighter. On the eve of his championship battle, she leaves him cold and goes back to her former playfellow. The prize fighter loses the fight intentionally because he learns his former flame is at the ringside to gather some publicity for herself. The two romp through some amusing situations, with the pug falling in her arms and everything is okay in the finish.
It didn't cheat me out of my publicity, because tomorrow every paper will carry the headline, "Gloria Jordan marries Joe Flynn."
The movie also co-stars John Halliday, playing the director, and was given acclaim as the finest acting performance in the movie. The movie would be released February 7th, 1934. Although this seemed like an exciting comeback for Marguerite, it wasn't meant to be. She went into retirement, seemingly wanting to leave acting in Hollywood behind. She would do no interviews, and she tried to lead a quiet, secluded life. In 1936, Marguerite's name would be in the press again, but not through a film, but through a tragedy. On Tuesday, November 17th, the Los Angeles police received a phone call from a Mrs. R.W. Bonnier, who was concerned about her brother who rented a boat and went sailing on Sunday, November 15th, and had yet to return. Her brother? John Bowers. Immediately, officials organized a search, which included Deputy Sheriff George Contreras, who was a friend of John's. Later that evening, they would find John. His body had washed ashore near the film colony at Malibu Beach. No papers or identification was found on his body, but he was tentatively identified by the sheriff's office. His friend, Deputy Sheriff Contreras, commented that John was depressed over his decline from film and fame. He also said Bowers had declared his intention previously of committing by getting in a boat and sailing away into the sunset. He added, John had taken his life in the way he wished. John died just a month before his 51st birthday. While doing my research, I stumbled upon John's death certificate. Here we see the principal cause of death, drowned, November 17th, 1936. Although he left on the rented sailboat on the 15th, they put the date of death down as the 17th. This would have been calculated by the coroner at the time of autopsy. In section 25, you see what they put for the reason for the death. And again, the date he ended his life was November 17th in Santa Monica Bay by jumping off the sailboat. Line 18, informant, Gertrude Bonnier, his sister. Section 6 gives date of birth as December 27th, 1884. Different than what is found online and on popular sites, but then again, actors and actresses usually fibbed about their actual birth dates. Then you look at the occupation section. The last time he worked in the moving picture industry, 1932, although his last movie recorded was the Western Mounted Fury, which was released December 1st, 1931. Then you scroll up, where it says married, widowed, or divorced, and you see Marguerite's name, although there is a typo, with the last name Bowers. And in box 5, it states John Bowers at the time of his death was still married. Marguerite and John never got a divorce and lived separated for over 6 years. On November 20th, John was cremated at Inglewood Crematory. There was a small memorial service, and Marguerite attended. Papers did refer to her as his estranged wife, so they must have seen the death certificate as well. A footnote. It is said that John's life and death were part of the inspiration for the character of Norman Maine in 1937's A Star is Born. The movie industry was not too kind to the silent stars of the past. Many couldn't make the transition to sound and had to compete with new, fresh faces. This was a contributor to many silent movie actors and actresses' early deaths. In 1937, a well-known theater called Carthay Circle Theater added insult to injury. They had many seats that had silver plates with movie stars' names on them. These actors and actresses usually sat in these seats for the opening of their movies. It brought many fans into the theater long after the premieres. It was exciting for the fans to get an opportunity to sit in the same seat as their favorite movie star, while keeping the newer ones, such as Clark Gable's, Joan Crawford's, and Spencer Tracy's. They decided to rip off and dispose of many other ones who had their fame on the silent screen, which included Marguerite and John's. In 1938, Marguerite met and started dating 36-year-old Sidney H. Rivkin, a practicing attorney in Hollywood. His brother Joe was an executive for Paramount Pictures. January 1st, 1939, on New Year's Day in Las Vegas, the two were married. This record, although filed with the state, has some inconsistencies. Marguerite took his last name as shown by the census and settled into being a housewife. This would be Rivkin's second marriage, having married in 1930 to a Lillian Siegel. The 1940 census also shows where the couple were living, and amazingly, this house still stands today. The house was built in 1924 and still sits on Gower Street. Marguerite seemed to be happy with her quiet life in a semi-retirement, but the lure of the silver screen would call her name yet again. According to movie publications, Marguerite was asked to have a small part of Mrs. Duggan in the movie Regular Fellers, based on the popular cartoon strip of the time, and also starred Carl Alfalfa Switzer. I had to watch it a couple of times to see where she was. You blink and you miss her. She is only seen in the beginning briefly and in quick faraway shots, sitting in the audience watching the kids. I find it so sad that once such a huge star received such a small, minute part in a movie where she didn't even have a line. Marguerite was now 39 years old, over the hill by Hollywood standards of the time. Sadly, that still holds in Hollywood and life, in some cases even to this day. It was released September 5th, 1941. Then it was announced that Marguerite would be making a comeback in the movie The Man Who Returned to Life, a movie starring John Howard and Lucille Fairbanks, niece of Douglas Fairbanks. When the movie was released on February 5th, 1942, Marguerite ended up having an unaccredited role as Mrs. Hibbard. Marguerite's comeback sadly wasn't much of a comeback. I tried to find a copy, but sadly it was in vain. Is she in this picture somewhere in the back? Could this be her in this picture in the jury box? And there was trouble at home as well. Marguerite and Sidney were arguing more and more. He wanted a stay-at-home wife and wasn't happy about her return to the screen. But with Marguerite's failed attempt at a comeback, no doubt it got very tense in the Rivkin household. But Marguerite would find herself getting yet another opportunity. A small one, but it would see her on the screen for new audiences with a talking and a credited role. Lon Chaney Jr., son of Lon Chaney, her co-star from Shadows, was filming a new serial called Overland Mail. Marguerite would appear on screen in the role of Rose, the waitress, in chapters 1 and 8 of the 15-part serial.
Lamont and shot a man named Slade.
I'll see Judge Carson right away. You wait for me in the office.
Did you hear what she said? Lee and his partner just killed Lamont and Slade.
Overland Mail would be released on September 22nd, 1942, and was produced by Universal Pictures. This may have not been seen as a huge role for an actress that was once so well known and well loved, but it was an improvement from the last movie. Again, she actually has a chance to act and speak.
Got any buffalo steak?
Yes, sir, the best in La Paz.
Bring me in a hunk of rare, will you?
Sadly, though, this would be the last time Marguerite would appear before audiences. Ongoing tensions grew in the Rivkin household, and in October of 1942, Sidney moved out and the couple separated. It was March of 1943 when Marguerite would head to court to get a divorce. Ruling over the proceedings was Judge Carol M. Sheldon. During proceedings, her statements included, "When I wore my hair up, he didn't like it, and after I put it down, he'd say he didn't like it that way either." She would go on to say, "He had a terrible temper and would fly into a rage when I'd have friends visit us and tell me he'd rather they wouldn't come to the house. After they would leave, he would sulk for days at a time." A Jane Alice Wardy was a witness, and after corroborating Marguerite's testimony, Judge Sheldon granted Marguerite her divorce. The property settlement was drawn up by attorneys Samuel Greenfield and Samuel L. Rummel. Marguerite, just before the judgment, accepted a job as an inspector in a Southern California war ammunitions plant. She was leaving Hollywood for good and doing her part for the war effort. Rivkin would go on to marry at least 2 more times. In 1946 to a popular journalist and Hollywood correspondent from Colombia who was called the Latina Luella Parsons, Ora de Silva, and again in 1948 to a Ruth Glynn. A side note, when I was researching Rivkin, I came across, of all things, unclassified FBI documents from 1963. They were in reference to a Matt Cvetic Memorial Foundation, the same Matt Cvetic that was an informant for the FBI inside the Communist Party during the 1940s. It was in regards to a pamphlet that the foundation released, and guess who was sitting on the head of the board's foundation? Yes, Sidney H. Rivkin. Marguerite continued to work in the ammunition factory until the end of World War II. She then moved back to San Francisco and led a very quiet, secluded life working for the Red Cross. She never again returned to acting. She seemed to have faded into obscurity, and that may have been just the way she wanted it. But her name would appear in the papers for a last time. On February 12th, 1950, Marguerite got very ill and was taken to the St. Francis Hospital in San Francisco for treatment. She laid in the hospital for almost a month, not getting any better. On March 10th, she was operated on, and on the same day, Marguerite would pass away from cerebral thrombosis. She was just 47 years old. Her brother Joseph, who is now living in Long Beach, would come and help prepare the funeral services, which were set for Monday, March 13th, at the Olivet Gardens of Cypress Lawn Memorial Park in Coma, California. Marguerite was cremated, and her cremains lay in the Olivet Columbarium to this day. On February 8, 1960, almost 10 years after her death, Marguerite was awarded a star in the motion pictures section of the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It is located approximately at 6902 Hollywood Boulevard. Marguerite, a graceful, talented little girl who suffered scandal early in her childhood, but would grow up into a shining light on the screen. Not only an actress, but a talented dancer that caught the eye of the great Pavlova. She was a costume designer and a songwriter. Her talent seemed to know no bounds. Her beauty captured the hearts of audiences worldwide. A woman who wanted to settle down and fell in love more than once, but could not find a partner that would make that dream last. Perhaps losing one of her greatest loves through alcohol and a tragedy. But thankfully, we can still see some of her talents through her films that survived. And although in the end she was basically forgotten, audiences around the world today can still see this wonderful actress, and perhaps with improvements in film preservation, her name will live on.